Good afternoon and a very big welcome to today's special learning webinar. My name is Amelia Shaw and I'm the Executive Manager of IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA. And on behalf of IAP2 USA and IAP2 Canada and IAP2 Australasia, it is with real pleasure that we welcome you to today's learning webinar, Public Transportation and Public Participation. And what we're really excited about is this is a partner webinar today. We're doing it in conjunction with Railvolution. And you're going to hear from Hillary in a few minutes. But before I start to introduce our great speakers, I'd like to turn it over to Drew just for a short housekeeping announcement. Drew, over to you, please.
Well, this is being recorded, so that's for your professional development purposes. You can go back and review it at any time. One of our member benefits at IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA, as a matter of fact. So within about 24 hours, we will send you the link to this recording as well as any collateral material that our presenters have. They may have some PowerPoint decks they'd like to share or some links, some articles, that sort of thing. We'll send that all to you within about 24 hours. We'll also be sending to you a survey. And if you would fill that out, it helps us to keep improving these things. It's some ideas on what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, how you feel your questions were answered, and if you've got any suggestions for future webinars, you can add it to those as well. There's a number of ways you can take part. This is a very interactive webinar. We have a couple of polls, for example, that you can take part in. Also, you're welcome to ask questions, make comments as things go along, and there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can click the little hand icon that you'll find in your control panel, and that will indicate that you want us to open up your microphone. And we will do that, and you can ask the question at the appropriate time. Or if you're the shy, retiring type, you can always write your question into the question box. And when it's appropriate, Amelia will break in and ask the question for you, and you'll get your question or your comment put out there. So in any event, we hope you'll take part and enjoy this webinar, and I will hand this back to Amelia and we can get this party started, as it were.
Thank you very much, Drew. And I am excited for today. We have Andrew, Nalima, Larry, Bakari, and Hillary joining us. But before we get going with our presenters, I'd like to hand it over to you, Hillary, and maybe you can talk a little bit about who Railvolution is and why we're excited about this partnership.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. This is Hillary Reeves from Railvolution, and I'm excited to be partnering with IAP2 on this webinar. Railvolution, for those of you who are not familiar, is an annual conference and a network of professionals focused on major transit investments and community and economic development. We bring together professionals from the transportation field, planners, engineers, architects, government officials, and people from housing and community development. So we do a lot of affordable housing. We're kind of known for breaking down silos and focusing on real-world solutions. We believe that the ways that communities leverage major transit investments makes a big difference in how their communities function, for those that live there at that time and for those who might move there. And we believe that to achieve the best outcomes, that authentic community engagement is absolutely essential. And so that's why we're really excited to be able to join on this webinar today with IAP2, which focuses on authentic public engagement, to talk about some experiences out in the field with people that have tried this from different directions. So we are excited to have this collaboration today and welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Real pleasure to have you on board and do this. So our first presenters today is going to be Larry. He's going to be followed by Nalima, then Andrew, and then Bakari. But I'm going to start off first by introducing Larry Hiscock. Larry is a consultant based out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in Minnesota. He has over 20 years of experience with community development and organizing. His previous positions include being an executive director of a community-based organization with a racial equity focus and several public interest groups. Most recently, Larry was a program officer with Nexus Community Partners, a community building intermediary providing technical assistance to community groups, philanthropy government and community development sector. In that role, Larry partnered with Hennepin County staff and community leaders to implement a targeted engagement strategy to incorporate health equity into the station area plans for a planned light rail transit line. So Larry, with that, you should have your, sorry, Drew, just making sure that Larry's got the screen here.
Was just sent to me.
Excellent, Larry. Good stuff. So with that, Larry, we're going to turn it over to you, and then I will introduce Nalima after you, and Drew, I'll get you to send it to Nalima once Larry's done. So Larry, really excited to welcome you.
All right. Thank you very much, Amelia. Are you able to see my slides now?
We sure are. The blue line extension.
Terrific. So I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the project, and then why health equity was important to the project outcomes, how we saw community engagement, and the approach that we took for this project along with the engagement outputs and outcomes. Then Nalima will take a deeper dive into the work of a frontline community-based organization that was part of the health equity engagement cohort, also sometimes referred to as the HEEC, and that might come up in our presentation. The Botno Light Rail Transit Line, or the Blue Line extension, is a 13 miles long with 11 station stops. It's estimated to cost about $1.5 billion when completed. And if you look at the 1 mile radius along the line, over 50% of the population are people of color. The focus of the project, of our work, was not about the alignment or the station platform location. The focus was everything beyond the rails. The station area planning effort was led by Hennepin County and was coordinated with 5 cities spanning urban and suburban areas. Now, Hennepin County took the proactive step to conduct a health impact assessment, or an HIA, looking at the line and its impact on communities along the corridor. What the study documented were stark health disparities that broke along geography and racial lines, along with large disparities in social determinants of health like income, employment, education, and housing status. There was more than an 8-year difference in life expectancy between census tracts along the corridor. The HIA also noted that the light rail transit line could improve health outcomes, but needed to have a robust engagement process that included those most impacted by those health disparities. And you can see a little bit of that change in life expectancy with the map that's on this particular slide. Now, typically when we are thinking about health outcomes, we focus on individual health behavior. But when we take a step back and look at population health, behavior and genetics only make up about 40% of what drives health outcome. And the rest are really these other factors that we have control over, such as social and economic factors, access to care, and literally the built environment. So if we really want to move health outcomes, we need to really address those drivers of social and economic factors behind health disparities. Stationary plans are not a silver bullet, but they do make recommendations that touch on multiple factors such as land use, critical connections, density, economic development policy, and housing. So it is an opportunity to impact multiple factors at once. To really drive home the importance of and the connection between social, economic policy, and health outcome is the example of redlining in the United States. Essentially, redlining was the explicit racializing of the underwriting criteria for federally backed home loan mortgages. Communities with more people of color were redlined or marked as an area of high risk for investment. This practice not only impacted federally backed loans, but also influenced the private sector. So when our state, Minnesota, its Department of Health compared those redlining maps from the 1930s with rates of infant mortality now, they recognized that those communities that were redlined had higher levels of infant mortality in relationship to those redlining maps. So for us, that's an example of the impact of structural racism, and this really puts pressure on us to ensure we have policies that intentionally work to build an equitable economy into all of our policies and infrastructure projects. This explicit discrimination wasn't just in home mortgages, but it was also in the routing of transportation ways, such as interstates, which had a tendency to be routed through low-income communities and communities of color. And this was very true here in the Twin Cities. Interstate 94 was routed through the center of the Rondo neighborhood, which was a predominantly African-American community, while avoiding communities that were affluent, that were oftentimes in the maps from the time marked as the Gold Coast. So this really lays a foundation to help understand why there is oftentimes a narrative within the communities that are most impacted by health disparities and racial disparities, that large infrastructure projects are designed, and because they were in part designed to divide, disinvest, and displace low-income people and people of color. So that's a part of a history that institutions and organizational leaders really need to come to terms with if they're going to work alongside with community. So in our work, we explicitly made sure that equity was a priority from the very get-go. And by doing this, we work with a group called the Governance Alliance for Racial Equity that has an explicit analysis around racial equity and works with government. In the series of trainings in the first couple of years, over 300 public employees were trained and introduced to these ideas of individual racism, institutional racism, structural racism, and health equity. And it wasn't just for county staff, but it was from multiple departments within the county, but also the cities and the jurisdictions along the corridor. This is really important to helping normalize the conversation, build a common set of language between community groups, community leaders, and also those who were going to be involved with the planning process on the government side. The next step for us was really to make sure that we had some clarity around roles in our strategy. So, Hennepin County continued to be really responsible for that broad level of communication, that informing the public, and then also for the formal public participation process, which was really this kind of point of entry for all. In that work, however, what they did shift is that they made sure that in their presentations and materials that they explicitly talked about health equity and helped communicate the connection between those stationary plans and health outcomes. Next is community partners in the cohort of community-based organizations that we worked with. Really, our efforts were really targeted on this focused engagement strategy that was really population-focused and allowed groups to come together and work in a flexible and adaptive way. So when we're talking about community engagement, we're really looking at community engagement in a way that is different than how we have typically experienced public participation led by government. In our experience with public participation, it is specific to a project or a fixed decision point and is time limited. Versus for community, their engagement is really about how people participate in the life of that community, and that activity existed before the project, it exists during, and it exists after. And it's really about the interconnections of this project to multiple things versus just the one project that's being presented to them. Next is community partners. The group that I work with has their own model that's really explains a different approach to community engagement and really lays that the asset or the strength that drives that life of how people participate in the life of their community being grounded in relationships, identity, culture, and spirituality. So for me, as I'm thinking about how to plan for engagement, I ask those questions around how does this project plan strengthen that inner circle? How might the work that we are doing with government or community, how might that weaken or harm that inner circle? So that aspect of that heartbeat of what really drives community life is always tended to throughout that process. And that helped inform how we moved forward with the engagement infrastructure that we developed. We worked with 12 different community-based organizations that were place-based, culturally specific, and brought groups together in the form of a cohort, providing technical assistance and also grant dollars to support their work. This monthly convening was an opportunity to debrief the previous month, engage in a capacity building topics such as around what is stationary planning, placemaking, affordable housing, or business development. But it was also a chance to build critical connections between those organizations and with project staff. And by doing so, it also allowed us to use that space to sort of vet issues or conflicts in a constructive way to build trust and come up with some shared solutions so that this wasn't playing out in large public meetings, but were really being dealt with in a constructive manner in advance. Each of the community-based organizations that were involved with the process also developed their own engagement plans, which meant we really had to help people within Hennepin County and also the planning firm to understand that each of the communities were going to take their own different approaches, and those different approaches would range from church meetings in church basements that took place over a couple months to build and educate community members about their project, and then led to input gathering sessions and van tours. Sometimes they were small gatherings that took place multiple times to really build a deep understanding, gather really deep knowledge, information about the experiences of the community along the board. And despite the diversity in approaches, this really rolled up into some pretty large outputs in engagement totals. This focused engagement model in phases 1 and 2 of the stationary planning informed over 2,000 people, gathered input from over 1,000, and over 80% were people of color. In phase 3, which was really around advanced planning and early implementation, there was over 3,100 people that were informed or consulted in the process. Again, over 80% were people of color. And there was a set of about 130 people that really were involved in leadership roles, influencing the project, advocating for the project, meeting with elected officials, and advancing the work together. And here's just kind of an initial list of some of those outcomes. So those stationary plans had explicit language talking about the history of discrimination throughout communities and linking recommendations to health equity priorities identified by the community, and also led to policy changes in municipalities along the line, and also some successes in sort of anti-displacement efforts, and leverage, and community-based groups were able to also leverage additional resources to support their work that was aligned with this particular project. To learn more about ACER or Nexus Community Partners and this project, there's also a resource slide that has some other links people can take a look at.
Larry, thank you so very much for that. That was a great contextual piece and very interesting to see what you're doing with engagement and how you're moving forward. We have one quick clarification question before I turn it over to Nalima. And as you know, we've got people from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and we've got a couple of non-Americans asking us, what does redlining mean?
Yes. So in the United States, there in the 30s, there was this really explicit effort to expand home ownership in the country. And to do so, the federal government backed mortgages, basically secured them so that more people would have access to loans to purchase homes. And in the United States, that is a huge driver of household wealth. However, when this process started in the 1930s, the actual criteria for the underwriting was racialized. So if you live in a community that was majority people of color, you were rated based upon that racial makeup as being a high-risk community for investment. And as a result, banks would not provide loans in those areas, or were less likely to. And as a consequence, those communities have a lower level of home ownership. The households there struggle to build household wealth, and this has contributed to our structural inequity and disparity in household wealth between African Americans and other people of color and people who are white in the United States. And this is just one of many examples of this explicit discrimination that went on for decades and still is present in our institutions now.
Thank you, Larry. Really appreciate that. Interesting. History is always interesting. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. So with that, Larry, we're going to turn it over to Nalima now. And so, Drew, I'm going to get you to change the screen to Nalima. With that, I'd like to introduce Nalima Sitata Munani. And Nalima is the Executive Director of ACER, the African Career Education and Resource, a grassroots issue-based organization working in the Twin Cities to advance equity, especially within the African immigrant community. She is a community development professional and strategist, and her work is driven by her desire to see everyone live to their full potential. Nalima sits on the boards of PRG, a nonprofit housing developer women venture, a women's business center that helps women grow profitable and sustainable businesses, and the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, a coalition of community-based organizations and advocacy groups building shared power. Nalima is an alumna of the Humphrey Public Policy Fellow and the James P. Shannon Leadership Institute. Nalima is committed to developing the next generation of leaders, especially African female leaders, and works to connect youth to leadership roles. She is an avid reader and writer and also loves traveling and the outdoors, and her most important role in life is being a mother and a wife. And with that, Nalima, we turn it over to you for the next 10 minutes.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? So what I'm going to touch on is from a practical sense, like how did we do the work as a frontline organization? Sorry, I'm going to go back here a little bit. That was engaging, the community members through this work. So as an organization, we engaged a total of 1,200 community members over 2 years through the health equity engagement cohort work that Larry had mentioned. So in the process of doing our work, as Larry mentioned, in terms of the light rail, we were interested in what was going on beyond the rails. And one of the top priorities that the community had mentioned during the station area planning was housing. Housing was an important issue. I think, as Larry has alluded to in his previous PowerPoint, that a lot of times when this infrastructural development has come through communities of color, it has served either to displace the existing communities or to divide the community and cause some sort of disruption within the community. And for us in our communities, housing is a stabilizing asset. And so this issue about how do we continue, we want the development to happen, but the community was very concerned about how are they going to be able to stay in the community to be able to benefit from this infrastructure that was being developed. Also, one of the goals of the Blue Line extension was to connect people, especially low-income communities and communities of color, to opportunities, right? So to jobs and stabilize their lives. And so we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the community need and how this conversation, how do we make housing a priority, and what types of policies and strategies and practices can we start putting in place so that people do not get gentrified or displaced from their communities. And one of the things that we found out when we're doing the analysis along the line, and also the health equity impact assessment found, was that along the line, a lot of families were paying too much rent for their house. So people were housing cost burdened. So people are considered to be housing cost burdened when they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And so in doing the work, we asked families, what does that mean when you're housing cost burdened, and how does it impact you? That means that that means that people end up sacrificing other things to make ends meet, like cutting back on groceries, delaying a trip to the doctor. And so that was impacting their health state, their health outcomes. And so those are some of the things that came up during the health impact analysis. So one of the methods that we engaged in turning community members out to have these conversations was just, the good old-fashioned regular door knocking as community organizers, going door to door, talking to people, inviting them to come out to community forums to participate in these conversations. And after collecting information from people about what were their concerns and what issues were important to them and what they would like to see done differently, we had different ways. We were engaging our elected officials and saying these are some of the laws that you need to pass, these are some of the policies that you need to pass. And we did that through various forms. It included bringing residents to the city council to testify. It included bringing residents to have one-on-one meetings with their council members. And also it included collecting petitions, doing petitions and articulating on the petitions what it is that the residents wanted, and then collecting signatures for people to sign off on those. So in terms of process, as an organization, we talk about connecting, connecting the dots in all the work that we're doing. So we were involved in the health equity engagement cohort, but we were also involved in a number of conversations that were happening around housing in the region. And so it became a question of how do we incorporate all these conversations that are happening? So housing is an important thing along the Blue Line corridor, and there are also these other housing conversations happening across the region. So how do we connect the dots and, and address this housing, issue holistically, so that we can be able to address this concern that our communities were articulating. And so collaboration is a central piece of our work. So in addition to participating in the health equity engagement cohort, we were also participating in all these other regional conversations around housing that are listed over here, and that was to increase our capacity and also to leverage, the power of other organizations so that we could be able to move, our agenda effectively. And so what the work looks like, it means that we were engaging political systems, and that was, the city council, mostly the local government, and also the county government. And so, like I said before, it included doing one-on-ones with city council members, coming to the city council meetings, attending city council work sessions where we could really present these solutions to city council members, and they could take a deeper dive and be able to ask questions about how, we know you want this, how are we going to get here, what policies do we need to enact, and how is that going to work out. And then we also worked in identifying nonprofit developers who we felt could be good developers of affordable housing, and being able to, to write support letters for them to be able to, to acquire some property. Because one of the other things that was happening and is happening is there's a lot of apartment flipping along the corridor. And so we know that even though we have a large concentration of naturally occurring affordable housing right now on the corridor, we have a lot of these apartments are flipping, and so they're in danger of becoming, of not being affordable. So this is a map, and it's not very clear, but this shows some of the naturally occurring affordable housing that is across the metro area that is all at risk of being converted into and there's a danger in them not being affordable units anymore. So housing is a big issue in the region. So some of the policy asks that we had for, in terms of housing, was city council must be given advance notice prior to the sale of any buildings. And so because there's a lot of buildings being sold along the corridor that were affordable buildings, and they're being converted into high-end apartments. We do have Section 8 where people get vouchers to be able to subsidize their rent, and a lot of properties are now refusing to take that public rent subsidy. And so we were asking our local government to ensure that people are taking those subsidies. Just cause eviction, we have seen a lot of evictions happening in this affordable housing, and so the just cause of eviction would prevent landlords from just indiscriminately evicting their tenants. And then the inclusionary housing is very important, because as the development starts to happen along the light rail corridor, we want to make sure that people are continuing to produce affordable housing so that people don't get displaced, and so that people, low wealth community members, can continue to live along the corridor. So what that would mean is that it would require any developer to include a certain percentage of affordable housing if they do for any future developments in the city. And so in terms of the opportunities that currently exist in terms of the work for housing, the Hennepin County at that time actually concluded their housing analysis on the Blue Line extension. The cities are going through this process of comprehensive plans, and we have an opportunity to put in that public input and community input that we collected, and these are 10-year plans. So how do we continue to ensure that we're going to have continued affordable housing production for the next 10 years? Identifying, like the map I showed, identifying and documenting what buildings are at risk and properties, so that we can make sure that, that we preserve them, we preserve their affordability, so that we can address this issue of displacement along the corridor that people are concerned about, and then continuing to plan for future planning across, along the corridor at the station areas.
So Nalima, Nalima,
Yes.
I'll just give you a quick heads up. You've got about 2 minutes left.
Sure. Yeah, I'm getting to the end. So
Great.
this is the
Thank you.
impact to date. So to date, we have had a lot of collaborative regional conversation on preservation of affordable housing. We have had a number of council work sessions. We have 3 cities that are considering, policy asks that we have put forward in terms of preserving affordable housing. And we're working on apartment action plan. We're piloting that in 1 city and hope to extend it to other cities so that we can, continue to produce more affordable apartment buildings and continue to preserve the existing ones. And that's the end.
Thank you very much, Nalima. Really appreciated it. We did have a quick question. Louise was asking, what does housing cost mean?
So being housing cost burdened means, so if anybody is spending more than 30% of their income on housing, for their rent, then we consider them to be housing cost burdened. So the regular standard is that people should not be spending more than 30% of their gross income on rent or their mortgage.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So Drew, just before or while I'm introducing Andrew, I believe we have a couple of poll questions that you're going to put up. So if you could put up that poll question now. So the first one is, how did you get to work or school today? So we're just going to ask everyone to please respond to that. All right, let's see the response to that question, Drew. So 15% work from home, 4% biked, 38% took transit, 12% walked, and 31% took their automobile. Is there any other poll questions for us, Drew? So let's get that.
As a matter of fact, there is, and it's another one that was suggested by, as soon as I can get this silly thing up, we got to hide it first. There we go. Now I can send up the next one. Biggest barrier to effective community engagement.
So while people are answering that question, we're asking both of these questions because, of course, we're dealing with transit transportation specialists right now, but they're also really keen on public engagement or community engagement. So it's important to us and everyone on this call to just get to learn a little bit more. I'm going to get you to continue to respond to that question. And actually, Drew, why don't we close it and then I can introduce Andrew. Let's see what the answers are. So what is the biggest barrier to effective community engagement? 28% said time, 13% said money, 9% said creativity, and oh my, 50% said leadership from the top. That's huge. So hopefully those of you that are on the call today will be able to go back and talk to your leaders about what good community, good public engagement looks like and what the benefits are, how you make changes as a result of that. Because it is up to all of us to be ambassadors for good public participation, public consultation. So, but before we get into that, I'm going to introduce Andrew. Andrew Devlin is the Manager of Policy Development at TransLink, Metro Vancouver's Regional and Multimodal Transportation Authority. He leads a team of professional planners and policy and decision analysts who advance transformative regional transportation and mobility planning initiatives in areas related to long-range strategic planning, corporate strategic planning, transportation pricing and funding, customer experience, policy development, and policy-oriented service design. Since joining TransLink in 2011, Andrew has also helped lead the development of area transit plans, network reviews, and studies and system guidelines. Andrew is Andrew is trained as an urban planner with degrees from the University of British Columbia and the University of Waterloo. And with that, Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you, perhaps even reflecting a little bit on what we've just heard about how people got to work and how people are engaging P2. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Amelia, for the introduction. And I'm glad I'm able to participate in this webinar. I'm going to give you an overview of our recently completed 2-year review of how we price the regional transit system here in Metro Vancouver and some of the different considerations we had to give to our engagement approach to help connect with a really diverse set of ridership and customers that we have in this region. And in preparation for this call or this webinar and talking with Amelia and Drew and others from IAP2, I am not a trained IAP2 professional. I work with many of them in our engagement team, and I think I need to give kudos to our government relations and stakeholder relations team who really led the majority of this. But I'm here today to give a kind of a planner's perspective, a professional planner's perspective on engagement in this process and what worked well and what didn't work well from that perspective. So just to start, Metro Vancouver is, or TransLink is Metro Vancouver's regional transit authority. We move about 400,000 people on our transit system every day. We provide transit services to 23 local communities within Metro Vancouver. Our service area spans about 1,800 square kilometers, so it's quite extensive. We have over 220 fixed bus routes, 3 rapid transit lines, 1 commuter rail line, and 1 marine sea bus service as well. So we have quite an extensive network that goes many across the system. The problem that we have in this region with respect to fares is that the current structure as it exists.
Muted. Unmuted.
I'll be back.
In that time, we've had a lot of change to the network. The network has grown and evolved. Our travel patterns have changed, and the existing fare structure has presented many issues for riders, particularly with respect to how we price the transit system by how far people travel. So similar to other agencies around the world, we currently use a zone-based system. So depending on the number of zones you travel, you pay a different fare. And you can see in the top image that we have three zones, but the zones are quite large. And there's lots of trips in the region that customers are making that are of the same distance, but because they happen to cross an arbitrary line on the map, they pay more or less than people making those same trips. That was a long-standing issue that we've heard from customers really since about the mid-'80s. And we had an opportunity in the last few years to really take a deep dive into those issues through the possibilities provided to us through technology with our launch of the Compass Smart Card payment system, which allowed us to really rethink how we price the system to be more fair and equitable and simple for users. So we also wanted to use the project as an opportunity to review all the ways we price transit. So not just distance. We knew that was a long-standing issue for customers, but we're also wanted to open up other ways that we price by the mode of transit you use, whether it's a bus or a SkyTrain car, the time of day you travel, the type of product that you buy, whether it's a day pass or a monthly pass or just a ticket, the discounts that different riders are eligible for based on certain criteria, and other considerations. So we really wanted to open this up to be a pretty comprehensive and wide-ranging review of all ways we price the system. So because of that, the comprehensive nature of the exercise and the complexity of it, we took on an approach to engage the public and do our work really in four phases. And we started, you can think about it as a funnel. We started pretty broad and started to whittle down through the process as it went along. And we engaged the public and our stakeholders in every step of the way. So we started in our first phase, which is really an issues and opportunities discovering process. So we went out and engaged with people across the region wanting to know what they thought the issues were, what the opportunities were, what were the sorts of things that we really needed to be focusing on through the rest of the process. In the second phase, we took what we heard, we balanced that against some of the technical work that we were doing and started to identify the broad range of different ways we could price the system against those different categories that I had in the earlier slide. And we went back out to the public and stakeholders and wanted to get their sense of sort of which options they preferred and why. We started to have to demonstrate kind of trade-offs to people and certain implications or outcomes of different options and what that could mean for them or their neighbors in terms of the trips they're making. And we took that input, and in our third phase, we refined that into a smaller set of options that were kind of the best performing and the most amenable to many of the issues that we heard from customers. And then our final phase of work, which we just finished this spring and earlier this summer, was preparing our final policy recommendations. So we we're doing a very comprehensive review of our fare structure. It required us, though, to really think about how we wanted to engage our ridership base. We have a very diverse ridership and customer base here in Metro Vancouver. We have people from across the age spectrum which use our system regularly. It's not just students or youth. That we have a large swath of individuals using it regularly. Same with income. We have a really balanced diversity of riders across the income spectrum. We also have a lot of people using our system for not just the work trip. We have a lot of people using the system for traveling for entertainment, shopping, personal business, and other reasons. So these are all different people who use the system differently, who get around differently, have different expectations. So we really needed to think differently and use a diversity of engagement activities and materials to reach as many people as possible through this exercise. Similarly, the way we price the system impacts pretty much everybody that uses the system. So we looked at activities like surveys. We did traditional forums and workshops where we invited kind of key stakeholders in to participate in kind of hands-on activities. We also went out to the public a lot, went to where people are in public information sessions, and used those to inform people of the process, drive them to our website to fill in surveys and get more information on options. We also had an online discussion forum which allowed members of the public to submit questions or chat almost in real time with planners and communication or consultation engagement experts to get their questions answered throughout the process. We balanced those activities with a lot of supporting materials. So we were using things like information videos, discussion guides, technical backgrounders, quite a tiered level of information dissemination to make sure that people who wanted different types of information on what these changes could mean to them or their family could get it in a way that was easily digestible or understandable to them. The outcomes of the project in terms of just numbers and reach were unlike anything that TransLink's been able to achieve in the past with engagement. We were able to receive responses from over 66,000 folks through our entire project over the course of the 4 phases. We've never been able to get this number of responses in any project that we've been doing previously to this. We also hosted a number of forums with stakeholders and elected officials. We had 6 public information sessions where we were interacting with over 600 individuals. We went out to the communities at different organizations and tailored workshops for them, and we hosted about 14 of those. So there was a lot of boots on the ground, a lot of face-to-face conversations, a lot of online engagement that really drove this process. So really, when thinking about lessons learned from this process, from my perspective, from a planning perspective, there's really 6 that I want to share with you today, and I'll go through each of these in detail in the next few slides. So the first is around balancing your engagement activities. When you're dealing with the public and stakeholder groups that have a lot of different interests, are located in different places, want to engage in processes differently, I think it's really important, as your budget and timeline allows, to really take a more fulsome delivery of different activities. So certainly digital tools, we're finding that we're able to have quite a large reach with discussion forums, surveys. Those are a critical piece to collect information from our public and stakeholders through this and other projects. The use of market research helps to understand perspectives and opinions from statistically representative samples of the region, but certainly balancing this with face-to-face conversations through meetings and workshops and public information sessions really helps round things out. Going to the people instead of always making them come to you. I think as planners, the perception is that we think of engagement as kind of having that open house, that workshop, and you can check the box sometimes and say that we've satisfied the need to engage. And certainly we're finding that that's not always helpful nor constructive. You don't reach a lot of individuals who may or may not be impacted by policy changes or by options. So we found really going out to bring our engagement team to farmers markets, to street festivals, to malls, to bus shelters, to SkyTrain stations, kind of intercepting people on their way to work or on their way to school, kind of having quick conversations with them, directing them to our surveys, to workshops if they wanted more information, was really really a helpful tool for us to engender more participation in the project. Certainly also it's cheaper for us to do these sorts of things and convening formal sessions as well.
So Andrew,
it's also more fun.
Yeah, they are. Andrew, just letting you know, you've got about 2 minutes left.
2 minutes, okay. The third area here is around striking an appropriate degree of complexity with the information you provide. So again, a key theme here is we were talking about a very comprehensive set of policies around how we price the system, and so we didn't want to overwhelm people with information if they didn't need to necessarily know it or nor want to know it. So we used a variety of techniques, including videos, which were really the 60-second sound bites of everything you need to know to be able to fill in a survey or participate in a workshop. And then we had cascading levels of complexity in terms of the information we provided through discussion guides and technical backgrounders. Trade-offs are inevitable when we're talking about public policy decisions. And what we found is we certainly, in the questions we asked and how we engaged the public on this topic, we needed to really avoid pitting groups or interests against each other. And really what this means is needing to frame up trade-offs in more general ways to ensure that we're not, having, well, in this example here, we have a lot of requests for increasing discounts for different users. Certainly, if we do that without additional kind of third-party funding, it requires us to raise fares for others. And trying to frame those questions in a way that's keeping more aligned with the principle of discounts, but not necessarily pitting groups against each other. The fifth area here is telling people what you heard them say and how you used it. So we strive throughout the entire process to really publish sound and easily readable summary reports of what we heard from the public and stakeholders, and drawing a direct line back to how we used that and how that informed work moving forward in the project. And finally, the last point here is split it up, but not too much. So I mentioned at the start that we needed to take a multi-phase approach because of the complexity of this issue, but I think it's important that you don't go overboard with this. It can certainly, over time, create burnout and start to lower people's propensity to participate. The newspaper clipping article here at the top, what more does transit need to know about fares, was actually from an early article at the start of the process, but I think it was really indicative of the sentiment that we got from a lot of public and the stakeholders at the end of this process around just kind of move on with it already. We're looking forward to seeing the changes. So if you want to go for more information on this project, the videos, the discussion guides, the activities, the materials, the collateral that we use, it's all available on our website. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Really appreciate that. And just a reminder to everybody, you can certainly send me questions through the question box. We will open it up after all of our presenters have presented to also ask for additional questions. But we're going to move right on now to Bakari Haight. Bakari is the founder and president of the MARTA Army. Bakari is dedicating his work to shine a brighter light on equitable transit across such a sprawled out Sunbelt city. His organization allows users of transit to empower themselves to better their system through clever tactical urbanism projects like adding real-time arrival info at bus stops, crowdfunding over $10,000 for trash cans at bus stops, and volunteer efforts that connect users with the transit agency during the Interstate 85 bridge collapse. He has also worked with the Atlanta Beltline, the City of Atlanta's Office of Zoning and Development, and the Atlanta Regional Commission. He is currently the Innovative Services Planner with the Dallas Area Rapid Transit and spends his spare weekends riding transit to thrift stores, hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and dance floors. So, Bakari, with that, we're going to hand it over to you, and you've got about 20 minutes, Bakari.
Thank you so much. Definitely can get to that. Good evening, everyone. I'll just go over the basics of our organization and just how we created this community of builders within the MARTA system. Just a little outline. I'll just describe the group and how we started, just our past and current campaigns, what we're working on in the current sphere, and just basically ideas for all of you to basically emulate what we've done. Just a little bit about us. The idea came about a couple of years ago with myself and Lyle Harris, who was in the middle. He was the former chief spokesperson of MARTA, and we kind of bounced around this idea of just basically creating this group around addressing the issues of the MARTA system. So anything we didn't like, we basically put up on this board at Transportation Camp, which is another great avenue for transportation professionals. If you've ever heard of it, to just create these ideas and ways to combat them. So we came up with about 50 ideas and with 50 people in the room. So the pictures you see are basically the meetings that we've had at various transport camps around America. And just it's our tradition to take a huge selfie afterwards as a job well done. Our mission basically is empowering local residents throughout the Atlanta region to improve the transit ridership experience in their own neighborhoods. So basically empowering those who pay the system, who pay the taxes, to better their own system with the know-how and the knowledge that they have. Basically, our main project that we have that's ongoing is Operation Timely Trip, and it's basically a program where we print out and extract real-time bus arrival information from GTFS data onto laminated signs. So this is an example of a quick and easy way that we're able to bridge the information gap for transit riders. 90% of the MARTA's 10,000 bus stops around the region have absolutely zero information. So it's hard for someone that doesn't have a shelter to know when the bus is coming, where it goes, in any of that. So basically our program allows folks to adopt a stop, as we call it, basically putting the stop at wherever they desire. And we provide the supplies as far as the laminating boards, the twist ties, as well as the rivets. And we're actually able to go to events around various neighborhoods and do the whole process right in front of them. So we're absolutely open and transparent. And then all we allow for them to do is just hang the sign up. And that's basically how we have a give and take process with this program. This is one of the signs that we have, and it's really detailed as far as just giving an overall map of the bus route and where it goes, what station it empties out into, as well as the different schedules on weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, since they're all different schedules. And we also are able to show the ownership of who is adopted the sign, and as well as with backups as far as where the schedules will come from. So you can basically just verify the information that we've put out. That project basically showed our usability as far as scalability is concerned. In 2006, we had 350 soldiers adopting stops around the Atlanta region. So that was a way for us to take what's normally just a neighborhood project into a larger scale around the region. And it was well represented as far as income levels are concerned. So the equity issue also was combated with allowing anybody to do it within any neighborhood. So no one was ever counted out. And this had a huge impact as far as the ridership experience. If you go to Atlanta now, you basically can't go anywhere without seeing one. So that enhanced ridership experience is something that we were proud of. And it also showed us a sense of ownership of knowing who we are as an organization, as well as within the region as well. And it was also a project that the Atlanta Regional Commission, which is our metropolitan planning organization in Atlanta, also was undergoing. So it was a great opportunity for us to bounce ideas that we had with the MARTA Army to them, as well as they work on their process for creating a merged bus signage, as you see below, which is where they were awarded a $3.8 million grant for the bus stop signage itself. We were also able to work on transit screens within various office buildings and condos within the Atlanta area. So this is an example of a condo building that we allowed to put the information on their screen so that any residents can look and kind of see when the bus is coming or when the train is coming. Another operation that we had was called Operation Clean Stop, and it was basically an intersection for a city that reached out to us and asking for any opportunities for us. We originally pitched a crowdfunded bench program to them, but they came to us and said that they've had an ongoing litter issue for a while, and we try to find ways to mitigate that. So we came up with this idea of doing trash cans at bus stops. And this is a small suburb south of Atlanta with about 40,000 people, high bus mode share usage of 20%. And only 5% of the bus stops had trash cans. So you can see how this is a really great connection to this. We entered into an MOU with the city of East Point and just agreed that they would be responsible for installing and servicing the trash cans while we would actually get the information to decide where we would fund the trash cans first. So we actually did the GIS work while they did the work to just draft up the documentation. And we were able to put 317 stops with crowdfunded trash cans. So this was going to different neighborhoods within the area, going to different civic organizations, and just basically getting the word out and just letting folks know about the project and how they could help out. And this is our first citywide project. As far as just working on different initiatives, we wanted to kind of work our way to a smaller win before we tried to work more into higher levels. We were able to donate over $16,000, and that was through grants from Hartsfield-Jackson and various area hospitals as far as the donations were concerned. And we had 72 fully funded stops. There's more today, and 22 partially funded stops. And another program that we have that we're also going to continue with this year is called Kudos. And that's basically just a program where people are come in and basically nominate someone that works for the bus operations or works for the janitorial staff to just basically give thanks for those who are behind the scenes that keep our system going. And this is a great program that basically showcases those who are on the front lines of making sure we get from point A to point B. And it was a great way to really put that to the forefront. And we're looking forward to doing it again this year because it's absolutely gotten a lot of traction, especially from the news stations. As far as upcoming initiatives, this is something that we've been working on with MARTA directly as far as the timely trip with producing stickers. For this one, this would be a smaller version of our timely trip, which anyone can print out themselves and basically using the QR code to the U-channel poll. So basically it's in the places that we can't normally hang signs. This is a great alternative to doing that. And just kind of closing it out with just ideas on emulating what we've done. Basically, the lessons that we've learned so far is that it's very easy to do what we've done, and just basically the thoughts behind it is just making sure that what you're doing improves the transit ridership experience. If there's anything that you're experiencing that you could see as a possibility of fixing with not a lot of overhead, then do it. And the good thing about our board is that most of us are transit riders ourselves, so we already know what the main issues were. We were in the circles to where we can literally get it off the ground sooner rather than later. Also, making sure it can be implemented locally by the neighborhood residents. You want to start small within certain neighborhoods so that just going back on the idea of scalability, that you're able to cover the whole portion of where you're doing it, and making sure you absolutely engage the locals. It's just a big insult, just like walking into someone's house and not saying hello or eating, just making sure that they're aware of it and they know how they can get involved. Also making sure it's scaled out regionally. We noticed that Atlanta and like other systems are regional, so making sure that you're touching every part of the region. We've done our public events in all different types of neighborhoods, so just making sure that you know your audiences, know where they are, and know their issues. And then the last one is making sure it's quick and cheap. The timely trip, we were donated the laminator and the printer by MARTA, and the other items that we use for cost no more than $10 at the local hardware or arts and crafts store. So making sure that you have a quick and easy way to execute it. On the bigger scale, just making sure that you have your agreements in place. Of course, we have our deal with MARTA. Although we're our own nonprofit, they help us out on a lot of avenues as far as gaining access to certain locations. Community improvement districts, which are also known as business improvement districts. Outfront Media, who owns the ownership to the shelters in Atlanta, as well as Georgia Power. Anyone else that would be involved in this process, and just focusing on clean stops and ideas like this in other places. Just think of where you could see something executed. Also, just making sure that your schedules are coordinated and just going to different organizations like hackathons, like Transportation Camp, like Revolution, to where you can bounce these ideas off of folks who may have the connections that you may not have, which is a work for us in the best sense, just because Atlanta is a really huge community as far as tech, as far as anything. So it really helped us out in that sense. That's all for me.
So Bakari, thank you so very much for that. There's just a quick question for you from Lisa, and she's asking, do you have a staff member at MARTA who works with your group on a regular basis?
We do. Ben Limmer is one of the senior planners at MARTA, and we meet with him every month just to bounce ideas off of him, just any initiatives that they have going on. Lately, we've discussed with him about events that we could possibly get volunteers out for. So Atlanta's hosting the Super Bowl in the winter, so we're definitely asking them about that, and as well as with their More MARTA program, which is basically a lot of the routes will be upgraded in service. So just basically also getting the word out and just how we can help with that. And in turn, we also just update them on internal MARTA Army board ideas.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, Bakari, thank you very much. We do have some questions for all of you at the moment that are coming up. So I'm just going to get you to open up your own mics while we get some of these questions answered. And Andrew, the first one is for you from Miranda. She's just wondering, how did you weight the results on opposition support for funding discounts for transit fares for lower income communities?
Great question. So in our surveys, we use public survey. So those are unweighted survey results that come in. We also balance that with a TransLink's own market research panel called the TransLink Listens panel. So the numbers that I showed on the slide in my presentation showed both sets of responses received on that. So the market research panel is weighted to regional demographics and distribution of individuals across the region. So age, location of residence, income, household size, mode of travel. So the responses are weighted to reflect that. And what we found, interestingly enough, throughout the majority of the process is that there wasn't much of a discrepancy between both the weighted and the unweighted survey responses in each of our phases of work. And if you go into our engagement survey findings on our website, you can see that for yourself. It was quite a fascinating outcome to see.
Thanks very much. And we had a question from Stephen around online discussion forums. So this could be for any of you, because I think you're all dealing with them in one way or another. Just wondering potentially what you were using and how did you moderate them? So anyone that has been using online discussion forums, what were you using and how did you moderate?
This is Andrew. So for our discussion forum, we tried several different approaches to moderate those. In our third phase of work, we used a engagement firm, and we had a staff member kind of full-time on that. In our fourth phase of work, we brought it in-house and did it in-house, and just had a staff member, a kind of key staff member responding to the questions that came through and filtering those to the appropriate planner or staff member for questions that might require a bit more technical expertise to answer. But we had a set of common FAQs, things that some of the low-hanging fruit questions could be answered pretty readily by that individual, and then filtering questions to planners for more detail. It did work out well. I mean, certainly it's an intensive 2 weeks when the discussion forums are active and open and people are asking questions about things. And so I think it's helpful to be aware that if you're looking to do this in the future, that it can be quite resource and time intensive, depending on the protocols and kind of policies that you put in place for how you're committing and managing expectations of how you're going to interact with the public on those.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Larry or Bakari or anybody else want to comment on discussion forums?
I do not. I don't have a lot of experience with managing those.
Okay. Thanks everyone. So just before we start to wrap things up, I'd like to come back to all of you with any last thoughts that you might have. You've heard a lot of information today. You've shared some great experiences and all the great work that you've been doing. So if you were to leave people with just a quick message, what would you leave them with? I'm going to come to all of you. So please be prepared. And Hillary, we're going to finish up with you, and then we'll close it out. But maybe Larry, if it's all right, I'm going to start with you. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave people with as they think about transit, transportation, and public engagement?
I really think of two things. One is the importance of really leading with equity and doing that internal capacity building so that public employees and key planning firm staff are able to understand the history of a community and understand what some of those concerns and fears are, so they can build upfront solutions and strategies to address those inequities within community. And the second is to really think about public participation, but think of strategies that go beyond the traditional sort of aspect of consulting, but really takes into consideration around how you really foster and support those core assets of community. I think Nalima's work with ACER is a great example of when you are able to partner with a community-based organization and they have a sense of ownership over the project. They leverage and bring in expertise, a network of people that can collectively advocate for the project if it aligns with their goals, and they become a partner in the actual implementation in the aspects that go beyond just what a public works department can do, but really gets into the housing policy, business development, and other pieces. And that is only possible when you look beyond just look beyond just simply public participation, but really to that authentic community engagement.
Thanks very much, Larry. Now, Bakari, just before I ask you to reflect a little bit, we've just had a question from Megan, and I think this is I want to hear the answer to this one, so I want to ask it. Megan's question is saying, isn't the work that the MARTA Army does really a MARTA staff responsibility? Why does a group of volunteers need to do it? So I think it's important for you to respond to that and what your role is and how you work collaboratively and cooperatively with MARTA to make things better for Atlanta Transit users. So I'm going to open it up to you for that.
Definitely. Well, I don't know if many folks know that MARTA is one of the main, the largest systems in the North America that's not funded by the state. So MARTA is really strapped as far as its operations and cost funding that they can use. So it's basically, it was a surprise that they let us even do something like this. And I think that at the time that MARTA was looking for more creative souls to give them ideas on how to help them do their job. So it wasn't necessarily a territorial sense, but more of they're helping us sense, because we weren't bashing them at all, in no way, shape, or form, and never will. If you visit it, it's a really great and efficient system, and it was just really ancillary to help them go and make these connections, and that's kind of, it goes into my point of my takeaway is just meeting people that you know that you would not normally talk to. Just being here with Dallas and DART, I learned a lot about the system and a lot about the city through the folks who have lived here for years. And they will give you an insight on what the city used to be, what happened, and what's happening now. And you can definitely make that connection for new projects that may have been put on the back burner or may not have been even considered just because of the lack of supplies, the lack of effort. So you never know who you'll meet coming across any of these events that we host. So just going on to that, I mean, MARTA's, they've never had an issue with us. They've actually welcomed us with open arms, and we're absolutely thankful for that. Just because I know most groups are looked at as kind of guerrilla groups around the country, and they've just been looked down on. So we're definitely thankful that Atlanta has such a creative culture that allows us to collaborate with such a large organization.
Bakari, thank you so much for that response. And Megan, thank you for the question, because I think we all needed to hear that. So appreciate that. So I'm going to come on to Nalima, and then I'm going to come to Andrew. But I will let you know, I've just had one other question, wondering how you involve disability and senior communities in the work that you might have done. But Nalima, if you could sort of wrap up, and if you can answer that question, great. And if not, maybe Andrew can as well. But let's go to Nalima and then Andrew. Nalima, over to you, please.
Let me talk a little bit about answering. Let me try to answer the question real quick. I think, how do we engage the elderly population and disability communities? I mean, so first of all, we try to use, ADA compliant facilities as much as possible in the areas, where we hold our meetings. And actually, for our work in the housing, for the housing work and the health equity engagement cohort, we did do some focus groups with some senior communities, and we went to where they were. So we went to the senior housing buildings. We went to a specific 3 senior housing, complexes that we worked with. So we went directly to where the seniors were, and we were able to engage them in that way, in the spaces in which they already, they were already gathering. In terms of final thoughts, what I would like to say, when it comes to community engagement, I think the big question in terms of doing authentic community engagement, as community members, as people who engage community, the big question for community is why, asking the why is the engagement being done? And also, I think people need to come to the recognition that when community is stepping up to participate in community engagement, they want to be involved in the decision-making process. So being very clear about what the community engagement is about, because we do know there are 4 levels of community engagement, and so setting that expectation from the very beginning so that people can know what to expect and people are very clear about why they are spending their time to come and participate. We also, Larry said, leading with equity, which is very important, and also as people who engage community and work within the communities that we live in and are part of, we also say that the people who are most impacted by the issue also have the best solution. So engaging the community as experts, not just having an not just extrapolating information from them, but recognizing that the best solutions will come from the very people who are going to be most impacted by the decision that you're seeking to make. So viewing community as experts also in the solution-making process and not just in the information gathering process is important.
Thank you very much. Great. Yay. Sorry, I wanted to stand up and down and cheer for that. Thank you. That was great. Andrew, any last thoughts? And then we'll turn it back to Hillary.
Thanks, Amelia. I want to echo actually a point that Bakari made earlier, which is trying to talk to as many people as possible that you normally wouldn't talk to or normally wouldn't engage with in your processes. I think in a lot of this kind of more traditional engagement activities, open houses, workshops, you tend to get the same sorts of individuals who tend to participate in those, which is fine, but it also is not necessarily indicative of many other different perspectives or views that are out there. And I think one of the key takeaways for me in terms of this project is really the opportunities that arise when you go to people and you have conversations with them when they're traveling through the system or when they're just with their families. You have a few minutes to chat and promote the project you're working on and try and understand from them some of their issues and opportunities that are kind of off the top of their head. We gleaned a lot of information from those interactions, and so I would encourage you all in your engagement activities to really try and prioritize those sorts of efforts early and often throughout your process. Another key takeaway for me was around avoiding talking about concepts and ideas in abstract. So I think as planners, we tend to focus and gravitate towards more jargon type terms and terminology, which can be quite frustrating for the public and stakeholders if they don't understand. And so we really made a concerted effort through this project, given the complexity of it, to really understand how we could talk about some of these terms and concepts in really simple and easy to understand language. And I think that as well helped engender a lot of participation and interest in the project. So I think really being careful with the words you use and the descriptions of things. And then to the question around engaging seniors and disability groups, we have a really strong community of those individuals in this region. We have a formal user advisory committee that we engage throughout this entire process. And I think that as well really the use of in-person workshops and going to community organizations' offices to have meetings helped ensure that we were reaching out to those groups, and I know they were quite appreciative of that, of those efforts.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So, Hillary, your thoughts. Great partnership. We've had great presentations. Your thoughts, please, just before we close it out.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the presentations from everyone. I'm very energized by them. I was struck by the idea that when you do talk to community, you find out what's really on their minds. You know, in some of the cases brought up here about housing, you know, you come to them with the transportation project and you find out that housing is the biggest issue on their mind, or bus stop trash, or, you know, the kinds of issues that are on the community's mind. And I'm just kind of fascinated about how the public and agencies and planning staff and consultants can try to listen to those experts and figure out how a transportation project can leverage the concerns that are within the community and to find those partnerships. So that, to me, was just a very interesting intersection that came up in these presentations today, as well as how they impact sort of larger policy and planning initiatives that maybe go beyond a particular project. So that was interesting, and I really appreciate the discussion.
Great, thank you. Well, on that note, we're going to bring today's webinar to a close. I would like to very much thank our guests from Railvolution for joining us. I'd also very much like to thank our presenters, Andrew, Nalima, Larry, Bakari, and Hillary. This was a partnership. We haven't done it before, but hopefully, Hillary, we'll get to do something like this again in the future. A very big thank you to everyone that's participated online with our session today. And just a quick reminder for our IAP2 members, we will not have a September learning webinar because we're going to be having our conference, our sold-out conference in Victoria. But for more information on IAP2 or Railvolution, just check us out on the website. There's lots of information there. Thank you so very much for joining us. If you have any questions, please get hold of us. As Drew said, information will be coming out to all of you with a recording of today's webinar. So thank you to Railvolution for this opportunity. Thank you to the presenters. Have a great rest of the summer. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.